The Kethavar War Council had never lost. Not once. Not in 4,000 years of galactic conquest. They had burned the homeworld of the Vorith in 11 days. They had shattered the Plaxi Collective's orbital ring with a single coordinated salvo. They had crushed 22 spacefaring civilizations, each more advanced than the last. And they had done it methodically, brutally, without mercy or pause. So when their long-range sensors first detected the third planet of a mediocre yellow star on the outer edge of the Orion Arm, the Kethavar Supreme Warlord Caxdul didn't even rise from his command throne. He simply ordered a standard planetary assessment. The report came back in 6 galactic standard hours. Single species, carbon-based, bipedal, oxygen-breathing, mid-tier technology, no unified planetary government. Divided into over 190 competing political factions constantly warring among themselves. The creatures called themselves, according to intercepted transmissions, humans. Caxdul had laughed. Actually laughed. Something he hadn't done since the Vorith begged for mercy on their burning continent. These animals are killing each other over lines drawn on dirt, his tactical officer Velrune reported, his crest feathers raised in amusement. They have nuclear weapons but haven't used them on each other in over 70 of their years, apparently out of mutual fear. They have reached their moon. Barely. Their deep space capability is almost non-existent. How long to pacify the planet? Caxdul asked, finally looking up from his tactical display. Velrune didn't hesitate. With a standard invasion fleet, 4 days. If we want to preserve the surface for resource extraction, perhaps 9. The Supreme Warlord nodded slowly. Send the assessment to the Harvest Division. Flag it as a Tier 4 acquisition. No need for the full war fleet. He paused, tilting his reptilian head. In fact, send the 4th Expansion Group. Let Commander Drextal use it as a training exercise. The bridge crew relaxed visibly. A training exercise. 4,000 ships against a fractured, barely spacefaring planet. It was almost insulting to call it a mission. No one on that bridge said a word about what happened to the last 14 species the Kethavar had assessed as Tier 4. They simply ceased to exist. 3 weeks later, Commander Drextal stood at the command bridge of the invasion cruiser Undying Wrath and looked at the blue-white marble of Earth growing larger on his forward screens. He felt nothing but bored professionalism. He had done this before. He would do it again. His 4,000 ships fell into assault formation. His planetary bombardment platforms rotated into position. His troop transports began spinning up their drop engines. He activated his broadband transmitter, standard Kethavar protocol for civilizations that had achieved basic radio communication, a courtesy granted so the dying species could understand what was happening to them. Inhabitants of the third planet, he broadcast in 63 detected languages simultaneously. You are hereby designated as property of the Kethavar Dominion. Resistance is recorded as... His sensors officer screamed. Not called out. Not reported. Screamed. Commander, contact bearing 007, multiple contacts. Commander, I am reading. The display lit up. Not in front of them. Behind them. On all sides of them. Drextal spun to his tactical screen and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a hatchling. Fear. Where empty space had been, certified, triple-scanned, sensor-confirmed empty space, ships were decloaking. Hundreds of them, then thousands, then more. Ships unlike any design in the Kethavar database. Massive, dark, angular, built not for elegance, but for one single savage purpose. Destruction. And every single one of them was already locked on. The last thing Commander Drextal managed to say before the first volley hit was a single, disbelieving word. How? The Undying Wrath died in 4 seconds. The remaining 3,999 Kethavar ships lasted 11 minutes. Not one escaped. Not one distress signal got through. Not one survivor was left to answer the question burning through every remaining Kethavar mind across the galaxy. Where did humanity get those ships? And more terrifyingly, where did they go after the battle ended? Because when the Kethavar finally sent a scout probe to examine the battle site 3 weeks later, the humans were gone. Their fleet had vanished, and the blue planet below was quiet, peaceful, and completely impossibly undefended again. As if nothing had ever happened, 47 years earlier. The meeting had no official name. It appeared in no government record. The 17 people in the room held no titles that anyone outside this bunker would ever verify, and the bunker itself was buried beneath 300 feet of granite in a mountain range that didn't appear on any public geological survey. Admiral Elena Vasquez set her coffee on the table, looked at the 16 other representatives of humanity's most powerful military and intelligence organizations, and spoke 4 words that changed everything. They are already here. Silence. She clicked a button. Holographic images materialized above the table. Grainy, partially corrupted footage captured by deep space sensor arrays that officially didn't exist. Ships. Not human ships. Angular, massive, dark. Orbiting just beyond the heliopause of the solar system. Watching. Measuring. Recording. These images are 14 months old, Vasquez said quietly. We've been tracking this species. Internally, we're calling them the architects, for 11 years. They've been doing this to every system they pass through. Cataloging, assessing, rating, and then... She clicked again. A star map appeared with small red markers scattered across dozens of systems. 22 species. All of them gone. All of them assessed by these same ships before they disappeared. She paused. We are next on the list. The room erupted. Questions, protests, demands for clarification. Vasquez waited them out. How long? A man asked when the noise died down. General Marcus Webb, the quiet one who always asked the right question. Based on their historical patterns, Vasquez said, 5 to 10 years before their main invasion force arrives. We can't beat them, someone said immediately. Look at those ships. Look at the size of them. We have nothing that can touch them, conventionally. Vasquez nodded. Which is why we aren't going to fight them conventionally. She clicked again. On the screen appeared something that looked at first glance like an asteroid belt. But the asteroids were moving with too much precision. Project Exodus Dark, she said. Not a weapons program. Not a defense initiative. A construction program. 40 years. 17 nations contributing in absolute secrecy. And when it is complete... General Webb leaned forward, studying the images. Those aren't asteroids. No, Vasquez said. They're ships. Camouflaged as asteroids. 6,000 of them. She let that number hang in the air. Built in the asteroid belt, wrapped in regolith and ice to defeat any sensor scan, programmed with fully autonomous AI weapons systems, and powered by reactor technology that produces zero detectable emissions. She finally smiled, and it wasn't a warm smile. We have been preparing for exactly this moment for 47 years. Webb stared at her. Does anyone else know? Other nations? The 17 nations in this room, their heads of state, approximately 943 scientists, engineers, and military officers, all operating under the most stringent security protocols ever devised. She picked up her coffee. No leaks, not one, in 47 years. How is that possible? Because every single person read in on this program knows what happens if it fails. Every one of them has children, grandchildren. They understand what the alternative looks like. Her voice was steady but not cold. It carried the weight of 4 decades of quiet, terrified determination. People keep secrets when the secret is big enough. The room was quiet for a long moment. 6,000 ships, Webb said. Against what we saw in that footage, how many do they typically bring? For a Tier 4 assessment, our intelligence suggests between 3 and 5,000. She paused. We believe we will face approximately 4,000. 6 against 4. Those aren't terrible odds. The odds aren't the concern, Vasquez said. The concern is what comes after we win. Everyone looked at her. If we destroy their invasion fleet and the home planet of Earth is right here, visible, obvious, unprotected, they will come back. With everything they have. 100,000 ships. 1 million. They don't lose gracefully. She tapped the table. So the fleet can't be associated with Earth. No human weapon signatures, no identifiable debris, no survivors who can report where the attack came from. You want to make it look like someone else did it? I want to make it look like no one did it, she corrected. I want the HFY, or whatever they call themselves, to lose their invasion fleet, arrive at Earth, find a primitive planet they've already written off, and have absolutely no idea what hit them or where the threat came from. She looked around the table. We fight, we win, we disappear, Earth stays quiet, and they spend the next century hunting a ghost. Webb was quiet for a very long time. You've been planning this for 47 years, he said finally. Since I was 23 years old, yes, Vasquez said. Since the day my mentor showed me those first long-range images and told me we had maybe 50 years to be ready. Are we ready? She looked at the holographic display. 6,000 ships, silent and still in the asteroid belt, wrapped in rock and ice, waiting. We're ready, she said. Back in the present, 11 minutes after the HFY invasion fleet ceased to exist, the Exodus Dark command ship, the INS Reckoning, moved silently through a debris field that had once been 4,000 warships. Fleet Admiral James Kowalski, grandson of one of the original 17, stood at the bridge viewport and watched the wreckage drift. Fleet status, he said quietly. 41 ships lost, approximately 900 crew, his executive officer Commander Sarah Chen replied. Her voice was controlled. Barely. 731 wounded. No HFY survivors detected. Kowalski nodded. 41 ships. 900 souls. He would carry every name for the rest of his life. Commence Phase 2, he said. The Reckoning's drives ignited. Around it, 5,959 ships began accelerating. Not toward Earth, but away from it, on pre-plotted courses toward the deep outer system. The holographic cloak systems engaged. One by one, the ships vanished from every spectrum of detection. Within 20 minutes, the battle site was empty space. Within 40 minutes, the fleet had dispersed to 17 pre-designated deep space waypoints. Within 6 hours, every piece of detectable wreckage had been collected, catalogued, and stored. 6,000 ships. Gone. Like they had never existed. Kowalski stood at his viewport for a long time after the last ship disappeared from visual range, thinking about his grandmother, Elena Vasquez, dead now for 16 years, and everything she had built in the dark, in secret, out of terror and love, in roughly equal measure. Message for Earth Command, he said finally. Chen looked up. Ready, Admiral? 3 words, Kowalski said. Tell them it worked. Supreme Warlord Cax-Dul had not slept in 11 days. This was not unusual for a HFY in crisis. Their biology allowed for sustained wakefulness far beyond human capability. What was unusual was the expression on his face. Something his subordinates had never seen before. Something that none of them had a name for because no HFY had ever displayed it in living memory. Uncertainty. The War Council chamber aboard the Dominion throne, the most heavily armed vessel in the known galaxy, was silent except for the quiet hum of quantum processors running continuous threat assessment algorithms. The enormous holographic battle display at the center of the chamber showed the last known position of the 4th expansion group, and then nothing. Static. Debris. Empty space. Tell me again, Caxdul said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tell me exactly what the probe found. Velrune, who had somehow retained his position despite delivering the worst intelligence failure in HFY history, kept his crest feathers carefully flat. The probe arrived at the engagement coordinates 21 days after the fleet went silent. It found approximately 40% of expected debris mass from the 4th group's ships. The remaining 60%, missing. No energy signatures, no weapon residue matching any known species, no survivor pods, no distress beacons. And the planet? Exactly as previously assessed. Tier 4, mid-range technology. No unified government, no detectable fleet assets, no shipyards capable of constructing anything above system defense scale. Velrune paused. The inhabitants appeared to be completely unaware that a battle occurred in their outer system. Caxodul stared at the display. 4,000 ships, he said. My ships. 4,000. Gone in 11 minutes. Yes, Supreme Warlord. By a species that cannot build warships. A longer pause. By a species that appears to not have built warships, Supreme Warlord. There is a difference. The Warlord rose from his throne. He walked to the holographic display and studied it, with the focused intensity that had made him the most successful military commander in Dominion history. 4,000 ships, 11 minutes, 0 survivors, 0 emission signature, 0 identification. Who could do this, he asked. Not rhetorically. He genuinely wanted an answer. His intelligence chief Moxvel stepped forward carefully. We have considered every known spacefaring civilization within 800 light-years. No species in that range possesses fleet assets capable of this engagement profile. The energy release patterns in the debris suggest weapons operating on principles we have not yet discovered. The attack vectors show simultaneous fire from all angles, an encirclement that would require pre-positioning of forces that somehow evaded all of our long-range sensor networks. How? Caxodul demanded. We don't know. Moxvel held the Warlord's gaze with difficulty. The most viable hypothesis is that whatever attacked our fleet had access to cloaking technology that renders ships completely undetectable to our sensors, not just partially masked but entirely invisible, as if the ships were not there at all until the moment they fired. Perfect cloaking, Velrune said slowly. That doesn't exist. It didn't exist, Moxvel corrected carefully. Another silence. Could it be the humans? Someone asked. A junior tactical analyst, young enough to ask the question that senior officers were carefully avoiding. The room turned to look at him. He held his ground. The debris pattern. The attack coordinated from deep in the system's outer asteroid belt. The timing, right as we began our approach vector. They knew exactly where we were going and what we were doing, and they're right there, on that planet. He gestured at the display. What if they knew we were coming? What if they prepared for it? Caxodul looked at the analyst for a long moment. The species, he said, that cannot build ships above system defense scale. That we know of, Supreme Warlord. The Warlord walked back to his throne, sat, folded his hands in the Kethavar gesture of deep thought. Send a second fleet, he said finally. 3 times the size. Full war fleet, not an expansion group. I want that planet assessed in person. I want every object larger than a grain of dust in that entire system cataloged and identified. I want whatever attacked the 4th group found and destroyed. He paused. And I want that junior analyst promoted. He may be the only officer in this council with the cognitive flexibility to understand what we're dealing with. The Kethavar Second Fleet, 12,000 warships, arrived at the edge of the Sol system 49 days later. They came in carefully this time, slowly, sweeping every frequency, every spectrum, every quantum wavelength they had. Their cloaking detection suites were running at maximum sensitivity, new software patches written in the weeks since the disaster, designed to catch anything with a detectable energy signature no matter how small. They found nothing. For 3 weeks, they searched. They cataloged every asteroid in the belt. Every comet, every moon, every object of any kind larger than 30 meters in any dimension. Nothing. They swept the outer system, the Oort cloud, the heliopause. Nothing. They descended into the inner system and passed close enough to Earth to read the electromagnetic noise of the human radio spectrum. Sports broadcasts, political arguments, music, entertainment programming. The same fractured, chaotic, wonderfully unaware civilization as before. No fleet, no weapons, no shipyards, nothing. The fleet commander, a cautious, experienced warrior named Brixthal, sat in his command chair and reviewed the results for the 10th time. Nothing. He thought about the 4,000 ships of the 4th group, about the 11 minutes, about the lack of survivors. He thought about the analyst's question. He looked at Earth on his forward screen. The blue marble, the white clouds, the completely undefended, apparently helpless, apparently primitive world. Something is wrong, he thought. Something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. He just couldn't identify what. He filed his report. Inconclusive. No evidence of advanced spacefaring civilization in the system. No hostile fleet detected. Recommend continued monitoring. He did not recommend invasion. For the first time in 4,000 years of Kethavar history, a fleet commander looked at a Tier 4 world and said, "Not yet." The Kethavar spent 6 years hunting ghosts. 6 years of deep space sensor sweeps, probe deployments, and intelligence missions across 100 systems. 6 years of analyzing battle debris, reverse engineering energy signatures, and quietly interviewing the surviving vassal species of their dominion. Species who had already been conquered but still lived, who might have heard rumors, might have seen something, might know something. 6 years of nothing. The ghost fleet had no home, no base, no pattern, no identity. It had appeared once, at the moment of maximum need, and then dissolved back into the void of space as if it had never existed. Caxtool had not lost a night of sleep since his initial crisis. Kethavar did not dwell in fear. They adapted, reassessed, and planned. He had diverted enormous resources to solving the mystery, but even he had begun to believe, quietly, privately, that perhaps the attack had come from some other advanced species that simply chose Earth's solar system as a convenient battleground. Perhaps he thought the creatures of the blue planet had simply been lucky. In the 6th year after the destruction of the 4th group, the Kethavar launched their next expansion push, not toward Earth, but deeper into the Cygnus arm. New targets, new acquisitions, life moving forward, as it always had. They were 6 months into the Cygnus campaign when the signal arrived. Not a distress signal, not a weapons discharge, not a sensor alarm, a transmission, open frequency, multiple languages. And one of those languages, buried in the carrier wave like a signature, was Kethavar. "This message is for the Kethavar Dominion," the transmission said in perfect, unaccented High Keth, the formal military tongue. "You have been observed. Your methods are known. Your targets have been documented. You destroyed 22 civilizations. We have preserved the data of all 22, their histories, their art, their science, their names." Caxtool was already upright in his throne. "You came to our system. You have returned to our system. You have watched us. We have watched you longer." A pause. "You will leave the Cygnus campaign immediately. You will release the 4 surviving species currently held as vassal states in your proximal sectors. You will never again approach within 100 light-years of Sol. These are not requests." Another pause, shorter. "This is what happens to those who ignore us." The transmission ended, and then the sensors lit up. Not around the Dominion throne, not in the Sol system, in the Cygnus campaign theater, 600 light-years away, in the middle of the Kethavar advance fleet, 18,000 ships, not 4,000, not 12,000, 18,000, and they had been there for, his intelligence officer was screaming numbers, more than 3 weeks, sitting in deep space, perfectly cloaked, waiting, not attacking, just sitting there, for 3 weeks, patient, silent, invisible. They had let the Kethavar advance fleet pass through them, let them set up camp, let them begin their survey operations, and then they had simply appeared. Every Kethavar weapons system was already locked and tracked. Every ship had a minimum of 3 targeting solutions. The humans, because now, impossibly, absurdly, it could only be the humans, had not fired a single shot. They were just visible, waiting to see what the Kethavar would do. Caxtool stared at the display for 31 seconds. His battle commanders waited for the order. They were ready. 12 Kethavar war fleets positioned across known space, 140,000 ships in total. If he called them all to this location, "Stand down," he said. The bridge went absolutely silent. "All units, stand down weapons." His voice was controlled, completely steady. "Signal the human fleet, in their language, all of them, that we acknowledge the message. Request a meeting." Velrune stared at him. "Supreme Warlord. 4 years ago they annihilated 4,000 of my ships in 11 minutes. Caxtool said, his tone academic now, the tone of a strategist doing math rather than a warrior seeking glory. Today they show up with 18,000 ships in the middle of my advance fleet and they haven't fired. He looked at the display. They could have destroyed the entire advance fleet before a single distress call reached us. They chose not to. That tells me two things. He held up one finger. They are not here to destroy us today. A second finger. They want to talk. He looked at Velrune. When an entity that can destroy you whenever it wants chooses instead to speak, you listen. The response from the human fleet came 40 minutes later. It was a set of coordinates, deep space, neutral territory, and a single line in high Keth that made Caxtool read it twice. Come alone. We will do the same. He wondered, not for the first time and with growing unease, exactly how many ships humanity actually had. Fleet Admiral James Kowalski, older now, gray at the temples with the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had spent 6 years preparing for a conversation he never entirely wanted to have, stood in the forward observation deck of the Reckoning and watched the Kethavar Supreme Warlord's shuttle approach. He came himself, Commander Chen said, standing beside him. Of course he did, Kowalski said. He's the most accomplished military mind his species has produced. He did the math. He paused. He's here because he's smart enough to know that we could have destroyed him several times over and didn't, and smart enough to understand that there's a reason for that. What do we tell him? Chen asked. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the stars, at the ancient, indifferent dark full of civilizations that had lived and died and been conquered and erased, and thought of his grandmother, standing in a bunker under a mountain, looking at images of alien ships and deciding that humanity would survive. The truth, he said. Caxtool had stood in the presence of dying species. He had received the surrender of civilizations. He had walked through the wreckage of worlds. He had never sat across a table from a human being. The creature, tall for its species, gray-haired with steady dark eyes and a deliberate stillness that Caxtool recognized as a warrior's discipline, poured 2 cups of a liquid from an insulated vessel and placed one on the Kethavar side of the table without being asked. It's coffee, the human said. It's bitter and might taste terrible to you, but it's the most important substance my species has ever created, so I feel it would be rude not to offer it. Caxtool looked at the cup, looked at the human, picked it up and drank. It tasted like heated volcanic ash. He set the cup down. Admiral James Kowalski, the human said. I represent the Terran Armada. You know why we're here. I know what you want, Caxtool replied in high Keth, letting the translation software handle the relay. You want us to stop expanding, stop conquering. You have displayed enough force to make that demand credible. His crest feathers rose slightly, not aggression but assessment. What I want to know is what you are. Humans, Kowalski said. From Earth, the Tier 4 world your species almost destroyed. Your technology contradicts every observable fact about your civilization. Our observable civilization, yes. Kowalski folded his hands. Let me explain something to you about humans, Supreme Warlord. We are a deeply divided species. We fight about everything. Our politics, our religions, our resources, our borders. We are fractious and loud, and we cannot agree on almost anything. He paused. But we have one universal constant. Every culture, every nation, every language, every human being who has ever lived. He leaned forward. We protect our children. He let that sit. When your survey ships first appeared at our heliopause 63 years ago, my grandmother, Admiral Elena Vasquez, identified what you were. She spent the last 40 years of her life building the answer. Not a military alliance, not a planetary defense grid, something you would never look for because it exploits the single greatest advantage human beings have over every other species we've encountered. Caxtool waited. We are patient when it matters, Kowalski said. Not always, not even usually. But when someone threatens our children, we can wait forever. We can plan for decades. We can sacrifice comfort and recognition and glory and the knowledge that anyone will ever know what we did. And we can do it willingly, without complaint, for as long as it takes. He straightened. 47 years. 17 nations that never agreed on anything else agreed on one thing. Our children would not die to your empire. 63 years of surveillance, reverse engineering your technology from sensor data, developing cloaking systems your sensors cannot detect, building ships that leave zero-emission signatures. We had 6,000 ships when your first invasion fleet arrived. We currently have... He stopped. Well, you'll never know exactly how many we have, that's the point. Caxtool stared at him. You have been building this fleet in secret for over 60 years? We have been building this fleet in secret since before anyone alive today was born, Kowalski said. The scientists and engineers who designed those first ships are dead. The admirals who planned the first tactics are dead. What they built didn't die with them. It was passed down, improved, expanded, refined. His voice was even, factual, without boastfulness. We are not a warlike species by default, Supreme Warlord, but we are an extraordinarily good one when we decide war is necessary. Caxtool was silent for a long moment. 22 species, he said finally. You mentioned 22 species. Every one of them, Kowalski said. Their languages, their histories, their art, their science, their names, their faces, the things they loved and feared. We preserved all of it. It exists. It is real. Those civilizations are not entirely gone, not as long as we hold their records. He looked directly at Caxtool. That is also who we are. We collect the lost things. We remember the erased. A very long silence. What do you want from us? The Supreme Warlord asked. And for the first time in his 4,000-year lineage's history, the question was genuine. He did not want conquest. He wanted to understand. 3 things, Kowalski said. Stop the expansion. Release your vassal species. And tell your dominion, all of it, every fleet, every outpost, every commander, that there is a species called humanity on a blue planet in the Orion Arm, and we are watching. All of it, all the time. You want them afraid of you. I want them to think twice, Kowalski corrected. I don't want wars. Wars are expensive and people die. I want the cost-benefit calculation to change. He picked up his coffee. Every civilization your dominion approaches from now on has a silent ally that doesn't exist on any chart, doesn't have visible territory or infrastructure, and will appear out of nowhere at exactly the wrong moment if your people make the wrong choice. He drank. We are everywhere, he said quietly. We are nowhere. We are the thing you didn't see coming even when you were looking directly at us. He set the cup down. And we are extraordinarily tired of watching civilizations die. Caxtool looked at this human, this one creature from a fractured, chaotic, coffee-drinking species on a single planet, and understood something he had never understood in his long, victorious life. He had conquered 22 civilizations. Each one had been assessed, categorized, and destroyed according to their measurable capabilities. He had never once asked the only question that mattered. What are they capable of that we cannot measure? The Kethavar Dominion did not collapse. It didn't need to. Caxtool returned from his meeting with Kowalski changed in a way that was subtle and permanent, the way a blade changes when it has been held against a sharpening stone. Still the same blade, still dangerous, but different in some quality that was hard to name. He issued 3 orders on his return. The Cygnus campaign was suspended. The 4 vassal species in the proximal sectors received their independence charters within 30 days. The first voluntary release of territory in Kethavar history. And a message was transmitted on all Dominion military frequencies to every fleet and outpost and forward operating position in the known galaxy. The message was brief. It listed the coordinates of the Sol system. It described in precise military language what had happened to the 4th expansion group. It described the meeting. And it ended with 4 words that had never appeared in any Kethavar military communication before. Threat assessment. Do not engage. 3 months after the meeting, a Kethavar probe arrived at the heliopause of the Sol system. Not the aggressive sensor sweep of the 2nd Fleet, but a small single probe broadcasting a low-power identification signal in multiple languages. Not a weapon, not a spy. A message. "This is a memorial marker," the broadcast said in 63 languages including English. "Placed by order of Supreme Warlord Caxdul of the Kethavar Dominion, in recognition of 22 civilizations lost to Dominion expansion, whose histories are preserved by the people of the system. Their names are recorded here. 22 species. Their names. Exactly as Kowalski had said they would be remembered. The probe stayed at the heliopause for 3 years before its power faded. No one from Earth officially acknowledged it. In a conference room in a mountain that didn't appear on maps 40 years after Elena Vasquez had sat in that same chair, her granddaughter, Dr. Maria Vasquez, director of the Exodus Dark program, 3rd generation, looked at the latest intelligence summary and allowed herself to feel something she had never felt in this room before. Relief. Around the table sat representatives of 41 nations now. The program had grown, the secret had spread only as far as necessary, and somehow it had held. The fleet stood at 23,000 ships. 12 new cloaking refinements had been deployed. 3 new drive systems were in testing. The Kethavar had not advanced on a new system in 4 months. 4 months was not forever. It wasn't even a guarantee. The Dominion was a vast, ancient, violent civilization with institutional momentum that would not bend easily. There would be other commanders, other temptations, other expansion pushes, but 4 months of quiet for 23 civilizations that would otherwise be ash and silence was 4 months of children growing up, of art being made, of names being passed down, and histories being continued. Update from Fleet Admiral Kowalski, his aide said, sliding a tablet across the table. Maria Vasquez read it, set it down, looked at the faces around the table. Engineers, admirals, scientists, intelligence officers, the heirs of a 60-year secret held by dead men and women who had chosen a difficult, invisible kind of heroism. "He says," she told them, "that the work continues." She paused. "I think my grandmother would have found that sufficient." Far out in deep space, deep, deep in the dark between stars in locations that appeared on no chart, 23,000 human warships waited. They ran on cold fusion plants that emitted nothing detectable. Their hulls drank every radar and sensor wave that touched them. Their crews lived in recycled air and artificial light and the specific companionable silence of people doing an important job that no one would ever see. They played card games. They read. They argued about the best football teams of the past century. They celebrated birthdays and promotions and got into petty feuds over who had taken the last of the good coffee. They wrote letters home that would travel through quantum-encrypted relays to reach families who believed their loved ones were stationed at classified but conventional research facilities. They were, in every ordinary sense, normal human beings, who happened to maintain the most capable, undetectable fleet in the known galaxy. When the Kethavar probe swept the Sol system, one of dozens of sweeps over the following decades, they found the same thing every time. A quiet planet. One moon. A civilization that had reached for the stars and found only its own asteroid belt. A species arguing about politics and making music and doing the 10,000 undignified, passionate, chaotic things that humans did when they thought no one dangerous was watching. The fleet was never there when they looked. It was never not there. 50 years later, a young girl in rural Montana looked up at the night sky and asked her grandfather what was out there. He was an old man, white-haired, with the kind of stillness that came from having spent 30 years in recycled air in the dark between stars. Retired now, living quietly, keeping a secret that would never fully be his to tell. He looked at the sky for a long time. "Everything," he said finally. "Friends we haven't met. Dangers we've already handled. History that nobody knows about yet." He paused. "And guardians." "What kind of guardians?" she asked. He smiled. The stars burned cold and brilliant above them. "The invisible kind," he said. "The best kind." He squeezed her hand. "The kind you don't see until the moment someone needs them most. And then—" He looked at the sky one more time, at the vast, ancient, indifferent dark, full of things living and dying and being remembered and being forgotten, and then they're everywhere. She looked at the stars for a long time. "Are they watching us right now?" she asked. Her grandfather didn't answer for a moment. "Honey," he said gently. They never stopped. The last transmission from Kepler Station came in at 03:07 hours Galactic Standard Time. It lasted 11 seconds. No distress code, no encoded warning, no dignified last words from a commander choosing death over capture. Just the raw, unfiltered audio feed of a military outpost being torn apart. The groan of pressurized steel buckling inward, the sharp crack of something enormous moving through corridors built for creatures a third its size, and then, buried beneath the static and the dying hum of failing power cores, a single human voice, not screaming, laughing. Admiral Keth Varun of the Sovereignty Fleet stood before the holographic replay table in the war room, aboard his flagship, the Unbroken Dominion, and listened to that laugh for the 47th time. He had catalogued every known sound a human made when facing death. He had studied their psychology, their fear responses, their documented breaking points. He had spent 60 years prosecuting a war against Earth's colonies, burning them to slag, salting their orbital lanes with debris, watching their pathetic defense fleets scatter like insects before a torch. Humans ran, humans hid, humans begged. This human was laughing. "Play it again," he said. His tactical officer, Sub-Commander Drine, hesitated. A small thing, barely perceptible, a half-second pause before the compliance chirp. Varun noticed. He noticed everything. The 11 seconds filled the war room again. Around the holographic table stood the 7 greatest military minds the Sovereignty had ever produced. 12 combined centuries of warfare. They had raised the Pelori homeworld in a single afternoon. They had collapsed the Veth Collective into surrender in under a decade. They had systematically dismantled every attempt humanity had made to organize into a coherent fighting force over the past century, cutting their supply lines, destroying their shipyards, assassinating their admirals before their names could become symbols. The Sovereignty had been meticulous, it had been thorough, and yet, Kepler Station was gone. Not captured, not occupied, gone. 17,000 tons of hardened military installation, dug 3 kilometers into a moon's crust, reinforced with siege-grade plating capable of withstanding sustained orbital bombardment, gone. The reconnaissance drones had returned footage of a crater so clean, so perfectly geometrical, that 3 of Varun's own engineers had initially classified it as a natural formation before someone noticed the human boot print in the scorched rock at the crater's lip. One boot print, pointed away from the crater, walking. "Sir," Drine again, that hesitation. "The perimeter watchposts, stations 7, 12, and 19 have gone dark in the last 2 hours. Varun turned slowly. Dark? No distress signal, no system failure alert, no debris field. They simply stopped transmitting. The war room was silent except for the soft, persistent hum of the flagship's drives. For 112 years, humanity had been losing this war. They had lost it brilliantly, desperately, heroically. But they had been losing. The mathematics were simple. The Sovereignty outnumbered them 40-1. Their technology was superior across every measurable metric. Their industrial capacity could produce a new warship in the time it took a human colony to repair a damaged one. Earth's government had fractured under the pressure decades ago. Their colonies had been cut off from each other, isolated, picked apart one by one in a strategy so coldly efficient that military historians across the galaxy had written admiring analyses of it. Varun had won this war. He had won it completely. So why in the last 90 days had 47 Sovereignty military installations simply ceased to exist? No declarations, no ultimatums, no patterns his analysts could map, no enemy fleet on any scanner. They had lost 47 installations to something that left behind boot prints and laughter, and nothing else. Drine leaned in close, voice low. "Sir, intelligence has a preliminary report. They believe—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "They believe the humans have deployed a new type of unit, soldiers unlike anything in their previous force structure." Varun stared at the crater on the holographic display. "What kind of soldiers?" he asked. Drine placed a secondary file on the table. It contained 17 surveillance images, each one pulled from a Sovereignty installation in its final moments. grainy, motion blurred, partial. Every single image showed the same thing: a human figure. Moving through fire, through wreckage, through vacuum, through crossfire so thick it should have been physically impossible to walk through and remain intact. Moving like they belonged there. Not running, not taking cover, not hesitating. Advancing. Faroon had not felt fear in 40 years of war. He had felt calculation and patience, and the clean, cold satisfaction of superior strategy executing itself perfectly. What he felt now, looking at those 17 images, was something he did not have a word for. 3 stations went dark while he was standing there. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humans were coming, and they were not coming to negotiate. It had started, as most irreversible things do, with a decision made by exhausted people in a small room with bad lighting. The room was located in the lowest sublevel of the Ganymede Resistance Council's headquarters, a facility that had changed locations 41 times in the past decade, always one step ahead of sovereignty intelligence, existing in a permanent state of barely controlled panic. The people inside it had not slept properly in months. Several of them had not eaten a full meal in longer than that. All of them had lost someone. Director Mara Voss sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces around her, scientists, soldiers, engineers, philosophers, and said the thing that none of them had been willing to say out loud yet. We cannot win this war the way we've been fighting it. No one argued. That was the worst part. A year ago there would have been arguments. Passionate ones. Principled ones. The kind that meant people still believed in the shape of the thing they were fighting for. Now there was just silence, and the hum of recycled air and the knowledge, shared and unspoken, that humanity had maybe 18 months left before the sovereignty's tightening net caught the last of the organized resistance. We cannot match them in numbers, Voss continued. We cannot match them in production capacity. We cannot match them in conventional military technology. We have tried brilliantly, and we have been losing brilliantly, and it has to stop. She pulled up a file. 300 pages. 7 years of work by the most controversial research team in what remained of the human military apparatus, a team that had been shut down twice, defunded 3 times, and officially classified as ethically non-compliant by 2 separate oversight committees. Project Fenrir, she said. We're reopening it. All of it. No restrictions. The room erupted. For 10 minutes there was argument. Real argument. The kind that meant people still believed in something. Ethical boundaries. The laws they'd built into their own charter. The question of what kind of humanity they were fighting to preserve if they did this to their own people. Voss let it run. Then she placed a second file on the table. Casualty reports from the last 30 days. Colony by colony. Installation by installation. Names. The room went quiet again. We are not making weapons, she said. We are making survivors. We are taking the people who have already survived things that should have killed them, and we are asking them, not conscripting, whether they would like to be something the sovereignty has no framework for. The vote was 6-1. Project Fenrir was reopened the next morning. The volunteers were called Echoes, for reasons that became obvious to anyone who spent time with them. Because when they moved through a space, you felt it before you heard it. An alteration in the air, a pressure shift. Something ancient in the lizard brain architecture of the human nervous system saying, apex predator, do not move. They were not super soldiers in the science fiction sense. There were no cybernetic limbs, no neural combat processors, no genetic rewrites that turned them into something alien. The sovereignty had spent considerable intelligence resources expecting those things, monitoring for those research programs prepared to counter them. Fenrir was something smarter, and, in its way, more terrible. It took what humans already were, what 200,000 years of evolution on a death world had built into the base code of the species, and simply removed the limiters. The pain governors that kept human bodies from destroying themselves in moments of extreme physical stress. The psychological self-preservation reflexes that caused hesitation under fire. The unconscious perceptual filters that shielded the conscious mind from the full reality of violence in order to prevent psychological collapse. The stress response suppression systems that biology had installed because sustained full threat response would burn a normal human body out in hours. Fenrir didn't remove these things carelessly. That was the first program, the failed one, the one shut down by ethics committees. The second program, the real one, spent 4 years building replacements first. New load-bearing structures for the nervous system. New metabolic pathways. New psychological architectures that weren't safer or more comfortable than the originals, just more functional under conditions that would destroy the originals. The result after a full augmentation cycle was a human being who experienced combat the way a surgeon experienced a complex operation, fully present, fully engaged, the danger and chaos and noise organizing itself in their perception into something workable rather than something overwhelming. They were still mortal, still flesh and blood, still killable by sufficient application of force, but they did not flinch. They did not freeze. They did not run. They did not stop. The sovereignty had never encountered anything that didn't stop. The first Echo operational unit, designation Reaper Actual, consisted of 12 individuals. They deployed against Sovereignty Garrison Station Meridian, an installation that had, 6 months prior, overseen the orbital bombardment of the human colony on Callaway's world, population 340,000. The garrison had a complement of 4,000 soldiers and was considered, by sovereignty standards, sufficiently garrisoned against any plausible human attack. The pre-mission analysis had estimated a 97.3% probability of mission failure with 100% projected unit casualties. Reaper Actual went in at 0200 hours. They came out at 0347, all 12 of them. The garrison station recorded its final log entry at 0312. When sovereignty rescue teams arrived 48 hours later, they found the station intact. No external damage. Every system still technically operational. 4,000 soldiers, all physically unharmed, all in their own quarters, all with the same expression. Eyes open, very still, not responding to external stimuli. Every single one of them had been awake when it happened. None of them had fired a shot. The Sovereignty's psychological analysis report ran to 900 pages and reached only one firm conclusion. Whatever the garrison had seen, they had decided, collectively, and without communication, that the correct response was to become very small and very still and wait for it to be over. The term that entered Sovereignty intelligence files that day was the term their xenopsychologists had borrowed from human literature, never expecting to use it clinically. Prey response. 4,000 soldiers of the most powerful military empire in the known galaxy had experienced prey response to 12 humans. The Sovereignty had laughed when they read it. Most of the senior command staff. An embarrassing, undignified laughter of disbelief. The kind that came before a very large and very serious recalibration of assumptions. That recalibration was happening now. It was happening 47 installations later, in a war room on the Unbroken Dominion, with Admiral Varun listening to laughter in an 11-second recording and feeling something cold settling into the spaces between his certainties. It was happening too late. Echo Sergeant Dara Nas had been killing Sovereignty soldiers for 6 weeks and had begun to notice something that she found, professionally, interesting. They aimed at center mass. Always. It was tactically sound, of course. Against most species, against humans before Fenrir, a center mass hit was functionally terminal in a combat scenario. You didn't need to kill immediately, you needed to stop. Center mass hits stopped. They interrupted the target's ability to continue advancing even if death came later. The problem Nas had discovered was that she didn't stop, not because center mass hits didn't hurt. They hurt enormously. Fenrir had not removed pain. It had reclassified it. Her nervous system still reported the information: this is damage, this will kill you eventually, attend to this. It simply no longer had the authority to override her operational intent on the basis of that information alone. Pain was data. Data was processed. Processing did not require halting. She had taken 4 center mass hits in the last engagement and had continued advancing for 11 minutes before the mission was complete, and she had the opportunity to sit down and be unconscious for a while. The medical team had used words like extraordinary tissue response and we genuinely do not understand why you are alive. And she had nodded politely and asked when she could be cleared for the next operation. The answer had been 6 days, which she had spent doing things that could loosely be described as resting. Now she stood in the drop bay of the Ghost Runner, the Resistance's most advanced stealth insertion craft, with 11 other Echoes, a full fresh unit, Reaper 7, and looked at the mission dossier on the screen in front of her. The target was the unbroken Dominion. Not a station, not a garrison, not a secondary installation or a supply depot or a communications relay. Admiral Keth Varun's personal flagship, the command nerve center for the entire sovereignty campaign against what remained of organized human resistance. 60 years of victories, 40 years of systematic atrocity, and one old man who had spent his entire adult life architecting the near extinction of her species. "This is ambitious," said Echo Corporal Jin Marrow, reading the same dossier beside her. He said it with the tone of a man who considered ambitious to be a neutral descriptor, neither positive nor negative, simply a property of a thing. "The Council believes taking Varun will fracture the campaign command structure," Nas said. "The sovereignty operates on centralized authority. Varun has been the center for 6 decades. The next generation of commanders hasn't been seasoned for independent theater-level decision-making. And if they're wrong about that," Nas considered, "then we will have still boarded the sovereignty's flagship and removed their most experienced admiral, which seems like a reasonable outcome regardless." Marrow nodded slowly. "I have no objections to the mission." None of them did. This was another thing Nas had observed about Echoes, the absence of the particular kind of objection that came from the part of the brain that was trying to avoid dying. They all understood they could die. They simply didn't let that understanding participate in the planning process. Death was an outcome. Outcomes were evaluated for probability, not avoided for emotional reasons. The drop bay doors opened. The void between ships was 3,000 kilometers of absolute darkness. Nas stepped forward. Aboard the unbroken Dominion, Admiral Varun was building a cage. He had spent 4 hours with his intelligence staff constructing what he believed was an airtight operational picture. The new human units, the Echoes, his analysts were now calling them, because the name appeared in intercepted human communications, and it seemed important to use the correct terminology, operated in small groups, favored darkness and confusion, and demonstrated an apparent preference for close-range engagement over ranged combat. This last point was significant. It was also, Varun had decided, their one exploitable weakness. They could not be stopped. But they could, he theorized, be contained. If you could not halt an advancing unit, you could perhaps construct an environment in which advancing became irrelevant, a target so heavily layered with defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire, redundant systems, and sheer overwhelming force that even a unit that could not be stopped could not reach anything vital before being rendered non-operational by accumulated damage. He had tripled the guard complement aboard the unbroken Dominion. He had reconfigured the internal layout, filling corridors with automated defense systems and seal-capable blast doors. He had moved his own quarters to the most interior section of the flagship, surrounded by 5 concentric rings of security. He was, he believed, ready. What he had not accounted for was that the Echoes already knew all of this. Fenrir had a second component, less discussed than the physical augmentation, a psychological processing enhancement that the project's lead scientist, Dr. Yuna Sato, called deep environmental cognition. In ordinary terms, it meant that an Echo in an unfamiliar environment built an accurate 3-dimensional map of that environment faster than should have been humanly possible, synthesizing visual data, sound, air pressure changes, the micro-vibrations that moved through floors and walls, the behavioral patterns of people who had spent years in a space and moved through it with the unthinking familiarity of the habitual. Within 10 minutes of breaching the unbroken Dominion's outer hull, Nas knew where the heaviest concentrations of guards were. Not from intelligence briefings, from listening to the ship. She rerouted accordingly. The 5 rings of security around Varun's quarters were real and formidable, and exactly as described in the intelligence package they'd been given. Reaper 7 went around all of them, not through. Around. Maintenance tunnels, atmosphere exchange conduits, the cramped service infrastructure that the flagship's designers had built for small, automated drones, and which none of them had ever imagined would be navigated by human beings, because human beings were not supposed to fit in those spaces, not supposed to tolerate those conditions, not supposed to move at speed through darkness in a ship actively hunting them with every sensor and weapon it could bring to bear. Supposed to and didn't were two different things. Varun heard them before the alarms did. He was not a man who startled easily. 60 years of war had installed in him a calm that many subordinates had mistaken for coldness. He sat behind his command desk, in the most protected room on the most powerful ship in his fleet, and he heard a sound. A small sound. A human sound. The sound of someone breathing. And he knew, with the complete certainty of a man who has just understood something he should have understood much earlier, that the cage had not worked. The wall panel to his left opened. Nas came through it. She was not running. She was walking with the precise, unhurried movement of someone who had all the time they needed and knew exactly where everything was. She was bleeding from 3 separate wounds. None of the wounds appeared to be slowing her down. Behind her came Mero, and behind Mero came the rest of Reaper 7, filing out of the maintenance conduit with the calm efficiency of people completing a routine task. Varun reached for the command console. "That will alert the bridge," Nas said. "Your bridge crew will come. They will find a room full of people who will harm them if they enter. Please don't bring them into this." Her voice was calm, conversational. This was somehow, Varun found, the worst part. She was not here to perform anything. She was simply here. He took his hand off the console. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You laughed," Varun said finally. "On the recording. From Kepler Station. One of your soldiers was laughing." Nas thought for a moment. "Corporal Tesh," she said. He laughed because he'd just remembered something his daughter said to him, before Calloway's world. The name landed in the room like a dropped weapon. Varun said nothing. "He said it was funny," Nas continued, "that the thing she'd said was about being brave. She was 6 years old. He'd been worried about her first day at a new school and she'd told him. He said she was very serious about it. That being scared was fine, but that being scared didn't mean you stopped." She paused. He thought it was funny that she was right, in a combat context, that a 6-year-old had figured it out. The silence lasted a long time. "What happens now?" Varun asked. Nayas looked at him with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who has already decided on all the things that needed deciding. "Now," she said, "you're going to end this war." The Sovereignty's Senior Command Council met in emergency session for the first time in 30 years. It had last convened to celebrate the fall of humanity's primary defense fleet at the Battle of Meridian Gap, a celebration that had gone on for 3 days. The session now convening bore no resemblance to that one. The 16 beings who took their seats around the grand table of the Council Spire on Sovereignty Prime did so in the particular silence of people who have recently learned something they cannot unlearn, and have not yet decided how to arrange themselves around that knowledge. Varun's transmission had arrived 6 hours ago. He had sent it himself, unencrypted, on a frequency every inhabited system in a 30 light-year radius could receive. He had stated, in the clipped formal language of Sovereignty military protocol, that he was transmitting under duress, that the duress was self-explanatory, and that he had 2 items to communicate. The first was that he wished to negotiate a cessation of hostilities. The second was a data package. 47 files, each one a detailed record of Sovereignty installation's final hours. Everything the intelligence apparatus had collected, organized into a single comprehensive picture of what the echoes were, what they had demonstrated they could do, and what the current trajectory of the conflict suggested would happen if the Sovereignty did not negotiate. The data package was not framed as a threat. It was framed as information. This somehow made it worse. High Consul Drivan studied the files with the attention of a man who had governed the most powerful empire in the known galaxy for 42 years, and who had never, in those 42 years, been presented with a scenario for which his training had not prepared him. He was presenting the files with the attention of a man who was beginning to suspect his training had been, in one very specific regard, catastrophically incomplete. "How many of these units do they have?" he asked. "Sovereignty." Intelligence Director Morvath consulted his notes. "Current confirmed deployments suggest between 90 and 140 active operatives, possibly more. Our ability to track them is, as the files demonstrate, limited." "And each unit of 12 can—" "Yes." The word landed before the question was finished. Morvath had clearly been anticipating it. "If they continue deployment at the current rate," he continued, "and if our analysts' models are accurate, they will have sufficient operational capacity to conduct simultaneous actions against all primary sovereignty military installations within—" He paused. The pause was long. 9 months. No one spoke. Dravan set down his files. He folded his hands on the grand table in the gesture that in 600 years of sovereignty history had preceded 47 declarations of war and had never, not once, preceded anything else. He looked around the table at the greatest military and political minds his civilization had produced. "We won," he said finally. "We won this war, conclusively. We won it a dozen times over, by any reasonable measurement." He paused. "What happened?" Morvath hesitated. This was a man who did not hesitate. "They didn't stop," he said. Dravan waited. "That is the entirety of the analysis," Morvath said. "Every model we built assumed a breaking point. Every strategy we employed was designed to create or exploit a breaking point. Species break. It is a universal military constant. Sufficient attrition, sufficient destruction of infrastructure, sufficient demonstration of force disparity, and an organized resistance fractures. The mathematics are sound. They have always been sound." He set his own files down. "Humans did not fracture. They did not break. After 112 years of systematic destruction, they built something worse. Not in response to the pressure, because of it. The pressure did not weaken them. It produced—" He searched for the word. "It produced this." He gestured at the files, at the 47 craters, the 4,000 soldiers who had experienced prey response, the 11-second recording of a man laughing in a burning room because his daughter had been right. Dravan looked at the gesture. "I am going to ask you something," he said to Morvath, "and I want a truthful answer, not a diplomatic one, not an optimistic one. Yes, High Consul, if we do not negotiate, if we choose to continue, can we win?" Morvath was quiet for a long time. "We can produce more units," he said. "We can increase defensive protocols. We can modify tactics. We can adapt." He picked up his stylus and set it down again. "We have every material advantage. We have always had every material advantage." "That is not the answer I asked for." Another silence. "No," Morvath said. "I do not believe we can win. Not because of their numbers or their technology or any conventional military metric." He looked at the files. "Because they have learned something. Their soldiers have learned it, and their civilians have learned it, and I believe their children are learning it from the cradle." He stopped. "They have learned that being afraid does not mean you stop, and I do not know how to build a weapon against a species that has made that discovery." The session lasted another 4 hours. When it ended, the Sovereignty sent an encrypted communication on a secure diplomatic channel to the coordinates Varun had specified. The message was 2 words: "We yield." Mara Voss received the transmission in the same room where she had opened Project Fenrir. The facility had not moved in 2 months, an unprecedented length of time that had gradually stopped feeling like a security risk and had started feeling, tentatively, like something that might be called a home. People had started bringing personal items. Someone had put a plant in the corridor near the main entrance. Someone else had, apparently, begun cooking actual food rather than survival rations in the small kitchen on sub-level 2, because the facility smelled, faintly but unmistakably, of something warm and seasoned. Voss read the 2 words 3 times. Then she sat down on the floor, which was not something she had done in a professional context before, and pressed her back against the wall, and breathed. The assistant director, a young man named Carver, who had been with the resistance for 4 years and had never known a version of his life that wasn't at war, stood in the doorway and watched her. "Is it over?" he asked. Voss looked at the message on the screen. 2 words. The weight of 112 years. The weight of Calloway's World and 46 other installations, and every name on every casualty report she had ever read, and every decision she had made in the small room with bad lighting. "It's over," she said. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the puzzled sincerity of someone working something out, "What do we do now?" It was such an honest question that Voss laughed. Not the way Corporal Tesh had laughed in a burning room, not that bright, terrible, transcendent thing, but the way someone laughs when they have just realized that on the other side of the worst thing they could imagine there is something unexpected. There is just life. Plain, complicated, ordinary life. Waiting, as it always had been. Patient. "We go home," she said. The terms of the cessation were negotiated over 18 months and were, by any historical standard, extraordinary. The sovereignty had never surrendered, had never been required to acknowledge the full scope of anything it had done. The concept of accountability as a binding legal framework was genuinely alien to its political architecture, not because its people were incapable of moral reasoning, but because the architecture had never needed to accommodate it before. It needed to now. The echoes were present for every session of the negotiations, not as a threat. Their existence was not mentioned, their capabilities were not displayed, but simply as people, sitting in the room, listening. Some of them bearing visible scars from engagements that had produced the 47 craters, and the shift in the sovereignty's fundamental understanding of what they were dealing with. Their presence was very quiet and very complete, and it communicated without words everything that needed to be communicated. The sovereignty negotiators did not forget what they were negotiating with. They did not forget that the people across the table from them had spent years learning to walk through fire without stopping. The terms were accepted in full. Dara-Na stood on a hill on a planet that had no name yet, a colony world, newly granted part of the settlement terms, and watched the sun come up. It was a yellow sun, not unlike Earth's, and the sky was doing something extraordinary in the early light, going through 5 different shades of amber and copper and finally settling into a blue so clear and deep, it seemed to have no ceiling. Mara was sitting 10 meters away doing nothing in particular. A significant portion of Reaper 7 was scattered across the hillside in various configurations of rest, which was something they were all learning to do again with varying degrees of success. "What are you thinking?" Mara asked. Nas considered. She was thinking about a 6-year-old girl's face that she had never seen, in a photograph she had never been shown, on a world that was now a crater. She was thinking about an 11-second recording and a man who had laughed because his daughter had told him that being scared was fine, but it didn't mean you stopped. She was thinking that Tesh had been right, that the girl had been right, that it was, in fact, very simple, so simple that a 6-year-old had understood it, and that the simplest things were sometimes the ones that broke the longest wars. "I'm thinking it's a nice planet," she said. Marrow looked at the sky. "It is," he agreed. "It really is." The sun continued to rise. Behind them, on a hillside on a world that had no name yet but would have one soon, they'd been talking about names, arguing about names, the way people argued when they were home and had the luxury of arguing about something that didn't involve dying. The rest of the echoes began gradually to wake. The galaxy was not fixed. Would not be, not quickly, not after 112 years. There would be complications and violations and tests of the terms and years of difficult, unglamorous, necessary work. There would be nights when it didn't feel like it was over. But the sovereignty knew now what it had not known before. It knew what happened when it pushed humanity far enough for long enough. It knew the sound a human made when they walked through fire. And it knew above all else the thing that had broken its certainty more completely than any weapon, that somewhere in the engineering of humanity, in the deep code, the ancient architecture, the 200,000 years of survival on a world that had tried consistently and creatively to kill them, there was something that simply did not stop. It had taken the galaxy 112 years and 47 craters and one 11-second recording to understand that. It would not forget. Neither would the stars. The Vakari Dominion had conquered 43 star systems in 11 years. They did it the same way every time. Find the weakest point, apply pressure, watch it crumble. Station Omega-7 looked like the weakest point humanity had. It hung at the edge of the Kepler belt like a forgotten tooth, old, scarred, and alone. Its hull was patchwork metal, marked by decades of micro-impact damage. Its signal output was weak, almost embarrassingly so. Long-range Vakari probes showed a skeleton crew of maybe 200 humans. Minimal weapon signatures. A single docking ring. 3 outdated point defense turrets that hadn't been upgraded in what their intelligence suggested was 15 years. Fleet Commander Vos Karath studied the holographic display of the station from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, surrounded by a battle group of 60 warships. "This is what stands between us and the inner colonies," he said. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Dreth, tilted his head. "Humans placed it here strategically. It controls the only stable jump corridor into their Kepler colonies." "Then it is a gate," Vos Karath said, "and gates can be broken." He wasn't wrong about that. What he was wrong about, catastrophically, historically, fatally wrong about, was what the gate was actually for, because Station Omega-7 wasn't guarding the corridor. It was the corridor. 3 days before the Vakari fleet arrived, a woman named Admiral Sarah Voss sat alone in Omega-7's command center and drank terrible coffee. She was 54 years old. She had short gray hair, a prosthetic left hand from a skirmish she never talked about, and the kind of patience that only comes from spending 20 years thinking about one problem. She had been thinking about the Vakari for 20 years. Her staff moved quietly around her. They had stopped asking her questions 2 days ago. They knew what was coming. They knew their jobs. Every single person on this station, all 212 of them, had volunteered for this assignment knowing exactly what it meant. Not one of them had hesitated. Lieutenant Commander Reyes appeared at her elbow. 29 years old, brilliant, terrifyingly calm. "Vakari fleet just crossed the outer marker, Admiral. 61 ships. They brought a siege formation." Voss nodded slowly. They did their homework. "Their lead ship is broadcasting a demand for immediate surrender." She looked at the message on the screen. It was thorough. She had to give them that. Precise terms. A deadline of 6 hours. A detailed list of what would happen to the station and its crew if the deadline was not met. She set down her coffee. "Send them our response." Reyes almost smiled. "The standard one?" "The standard one." The message that went out to Fleet Commander Vos Karath was 3 words long. "Come and take it." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Vos Karath read the message twice. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried genuine amusement. He had expected fear, pleading perhaps, an attempt to negotiate. 3 words. "Brave," Dreth said carefully. "Foolish," Vos Karath replied. "Begin the siege formation, standard approach. I want that station intact enough to use as a forward base." He paused. "Do not underestimate the humans. They are stubborn. But stubborn is not the same as capable." He would think about that distinction a great deal in the days that followed. The Vakari fleet moved in like a closing fist. 61 ships arranging themselves in a perfect sphere around Omega-7, cutting off every approach vector, every escape route, every possible avenue of reinforcement. It was textbook siege doctrine. It had worked 43 times before. What none of their scans picked up, what no Vakari sensor in the fleet detected, was the 240 kilometers of dormant hardware sleeping in the asteroid field surrounding the station. Cold, unpowered, invisible, waiting. Admiral Voss watched the fleet lock into position on her display and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not even anticipation. Satisfaction. "They're in," Reyes said quietly. "Yes," she said. "They are." She picked up her coffee again and took a long, slow sip. "Now we close the door." The first 6 hours of the siege went exactly as Voskarath expected. He sent precision fire at Omega-7's point defense turrets. All 3 were destroyed within the first 40 minutes. The humans made no attempt to repair or replace them. He took this as a sign of limited resources. He was right about that. He was wrong about what it meant. He attempted to jam the station's communications. The jamming worked perfectly. No signals in, no signals out. He took this as successful isolation of the target. He was right about that too. What he did not understand, what his entire fleet did not understand, was that Omega-7 didn't need to communicate with anyone. Everything Admiral Voss needed was already here. Had been here for 2 years, placed carefully, quietly, without ceremony, by a construction project officially listed in Earth's military budget as Belt Infrastructure Maintenance, Kepler Sector. Nobody reads budget line items. The Vakari certainly hadn't. At hour 7, Voskarath made his first serious move. He detached 12 ships from the sphere formation and sent them forward to begin hull-breaching operations, the standard method for taking a station intact. Specialized ships that would anchor to the hull, cut through it, and deliver boarding parties directly into the interior. The 12 ships crossed the 40,000-kilometer threshold. Nothing happened. They crossed the 20,000-kilometer threshold. Still nothing. Voskarath watched with something approaching satisfaction. The humans were simply going to let them come. Perhaps they had accepted the inevitable. Perhaps, at 8,000 kilometers, the asteroid field woke up, not all at once. That was the first thing that made it terrifying. It didn't explode into action like a panicked defense. It was systematic, methodical. The way a professional does a job. The first thing the Vakari ships saw on their sensors was mass. Hundreds of objects, previously registering as inert rock, now emitting power signatures, drive signatures, weapon signatures. What? Dreth began. The first rail strike hit a Vakari cruiser at 47 kilometers per second. The cruiser did not survive. In 30 seconds, 4 of the 12 advanced ships were destroyed. Not damaged, not disabled, destroyed. Hit by kinetic impactors moving so fast that the ship's shields had no meaningful time to respond. The other 8 broke formation immediately, scattering back toward the main fleet. 2 more were hit during the retreat. 6 ships returned out of 12. In 30 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was very quiet. Report, Voskarath said, his voice completely flat. The tactical officer's hands were moving fast across his console. The asteroid field is not an asteroid field, Commander. The objects are artificial, disguised as rock. We count. A pause. A long pause. We count over 400 individual units. Mixed weapons platforms, railguns, missile batteries, point defense clusters. Another pause. And something else. Something we don't have a classification for. Show me. The display updated. Scattered throughout the field were larger objects, still disguised as asteroids, but now that the fleet sensors were actively looking, clearly artificial. Long, cylindrical, heavily armored. What are those? Dreth asked. Nobody answered because nobody knew. Inside Omega-7, Lieutenant Commander Reyes looked at Admiral Voss. They've identified the hammers. How many? Best guess. They can see about 30% of them. Voss nodded. Good. Let them look. Voskarath spent 2 hours reorganizing his thinking. He was a methodical man. It was his greatest strength, and though he didn't know it yet, his greatest weakness in this particular situation. He understood the trap intellectually. This station was bait. The field was the real defense, and humanity had spent considerable time and resources building it without his intelligence services noticing. He respected that. He even admired it slightly. But he still had 61 ships, now 55. And they were still in siege formation around a station with 200 people on it. His weapons outranged most of what the field had shown him. He had options. What he decided to do was methodical, calculated, and completely reasonable given the information he had. He pulled his fleet back to 80,000 kilometers and began long-range bombardment of the weapons platforms, picking them off one by one from outside their effective range. It worked. For 40 minutes it worked beautifully. 14 platforms destroyed, minimal return fire, no Vakari casualties. Then Admiral Voss activated the second layer. There's a concept in human military history called a defense in depth. It means you don't put all your strength at one line. You put strength everywhere, layered, so that when an enemy breaks through one line, they find another line waiting, and then another until they are deep inside your territory, exhausted and surrounded, and they realize too late that they were never breaching a defense. They were walking into a stomach. The second layer of Omega-7's trap was not in the asteroid field. It was under it. 56 autonomous combat drones, each the size of a large ground vehicle, had been anchored to asteroids at the very bottom of the field, too deep for Vakari long-range sensors to detect clearly. They were not disguised as rock. They were simply small, cold, and patient. When Voss Kareth pulled his fleet back to 80,000 kilometers to begin long-range bombardment, he unknowingly repositioned his ships into the drone's optimal engagement range. The drones launched, not at the warships, at the engines. 4 Vakari capital ships lost engine capability in the first drone wave. They didn't explode. The drones were designed to disable, not destroy. An exploding ship is gone. A disabled ship stays in place, and a disabled ship in a battle zone is a problem for every other ship around it. Voss Kareth found himself managing a tactical nightmare. 51 combat-capable ships, 4 drifting hulks, waves of drones targeting his propulsion systems, and an asteroid field full of railguns that punished any ship that came within 30,000 kilometers of the station. He was still winning on paper. He still had more firepower than anything in front of him, but he was no longer controlling the tempo of the battle. Admiral Voss was. She sat in the command center of Omega-7 and watched the Vakari fleet with the detached focus of someone who had planned this engagement in simulation roughly 1,200 times. She had run every version. Every response the Vakari commander could make she had modeled. Every adaptation, every tactical adjustment. There was one move she was waiting for. Reyes appeared beside her. He's pulling the fleet into a tighter formation, concentrating firepower to punch through the field in a single corridor. There it is, Voss said quietly. Should I activate the hammers? She looked at the display for a long moment. The Vakari fleet was compressing, ships moving closer together, presenting a concentrated mass of firepower. It was the correct move given their information. It was what she would have done. It was also exactly what the hammers were built for. Not yet, she said. Let them commit. Voss Kareth committed everything to the corridor push. It was a good plan. A focused burn through a single gap in the weapons field, overwhelming the platforms in that sector through sheer volume of fire, then pushing the fleet through the gap to close engagement range where the station's lack of point defense would be decisive. He assembled 43 of his best ships into a tight spear formation and drove it at Omega-7's northern approach at maximum combat speed. The platforms in that sector returned fire. Some were destroyed. The Vakari fleet pushed through, taking hits, losing 2 more ships but pushing through. They were 25,000 kilometers from Omega-7 when the hammers fired. The hammers were officially designated as Kinetic Delivery Systems, Long-Range Autonomous, KDSLA in Earth's procurement documents. They were large because they had to be. The projectiles they launched were not missiles. They were not energy weapons. They were solid tungsten rods, 2 meters in diameter, 12 meters long, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light through a magnetic launch tube 4 kilometers long. Each rod carried no explosives. It didn't need any. Physics did the work. The first hammer fired at a Vakari battlecruiser at the center of the spear formation. The targeting solution had been calculated 6 minutes earlier. The rod crossed the distance in 0.4 seconds. At that velocity, the impact energy was approximately equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The battlecruiser ceased to exist. In the next 11 seconds, 7 more hammers fired. Each one had been pre-targeted based on the fleet's predicted position during the corridor push, positions that Voss's methodical, predictable tactics had delivered with almost perfect accuracy. 8 ships. Gone. Not destroyed in the conventional sense. Simply struck by physics so violent that the word destroyed felt inadequate. The Vakari spear formation broke apart. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, an alarm was sounding that Vos Kareth had never heard in combat before. He had heard it in training simulations. It was the mass casualty alert, triggered when sensor systems detected the simultaneous destruction of multiple capital ships. "Report," he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. 8 vessels lost, Commander. The weapons that hit them." The tactical officer stopped. "Report," Vos Kareth said again. "We have no countermeasure for what hit them. The projectiles moved too fast for our point defense to engage. We had less than half a second of warning." A pause. "We believe there are more of those weapons in the field. We cannot determine how many." Vos Kareth looked at the display. He had arrived with 61 ships. He had 43 combat-capable vessels remaining. He had been here for 11 hours. He had not reached the station. For the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Vos Kareth felt something he didn't have a word for in his language. Humans would have called it the specific, stomach-dropping feeling of realizing you have been completely, thoroughly, expertly outplayed. "Options," he said. Silence. "Someone give me options." Dreth spoke carefully. "We can attempt to withdraw through the corridor we entered on." Vos Kareth looked at him. Then he looked at the display. The entry corridor. The one his fleet had come through when the field was dormant and silent and pretending to be empty space. "Is the entry corridor clear?" he asked the tactical officer. A long pause. "No, Commander. The platforms have repositioned. The entry corridor is covered." Of course it was. Admiral Sarah Vos had one rule about traps. A trap that kills everything in it is a weapon. A trap that demonstrates something is a message. And humanity, at this particular moment in its relationship with the Vakari Dominion, needed to send a message far more than it needed 43 more destroyed ships. She opened a communication channel to the Vakari fleet. It took them 6 minutes to respond. She waited. She was good at waiting. When Vos Kareth's face appeared on her screen, she studied him carefully. He was composed. Whatever he was feeling, he had put it somewhere internal and locked it away. She respected that. "Admiral," he said. His translation unit rendered the word precisely. "Commander," she said, "I'm going to explain something to you, and I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say it once, and I need you to bring it home to the people who sent you." He said nothing. She took that as permission to continue. "You have 43 ships," she said. "You entered this system with 61. You have been here 11 hours, and you have not come within 8,000 kilometers of this station." She let that sit. "I have enough hammers left in this field to destroy every ship you have remaining. You cannot see them all. You cannot target them all. Your point defense cannot stop them." Another pause. "I want you to understand that I have not fired those hammers. That is a choice I am making right now, in this moment." Vos Kareth's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to go home," Vos said simply. "I want you to tell the Dominion what happened here. I want you to describe this station, this field, these weapons. I want you to be honest about the numbers." She leaned forward slightly. "And I want you to understand that this is not our most defended position. This is a station we built specifically for you to attack. Everything you see here, the platforms, the drones, the hammers, we built it knowing you were coming, knowing what formation you would use, knowing what tactics you would employ." She let him think about that. "We have been watching you for a long time, Commander. You conquer through predictability. You find the weak point and you push. You have done it 43 times, and it has always worked." She sat back. "It worked here too. We gave you a weak point. You found it. You pushed." A pause. "And now you're inside a trap that was built 2 years ago to hold exactly 61 ships." Vos Kareth was quiet for a very long time. "You let us in," he said finally. "Not a question." "We invited you in," Vos corrected. "There's a difference." What happened next would be studied in Vicari military academies for decades. Vos Karath, to his considerable credit, did not make additional tactical errors. He did not attempt a desperate assault. He did not call Voss's bluff, correctly understanding that there was no bluff to call. He issued a fleet-wide order, gathered his 43 remaining ships into a careful formation, and began a slow, methodical withdrawal through the one corridor the Hammers had left open. Because of course Voss had left a corridor open. She had planned for that too. As the Vicari fleet retreated, every surviving ship passed within clear visual sensor range of something that had been invisible during the approach. Attached to the outer hull of Omega-7, clearly visible now, were markers. Plaques. 43 of them, each one etched with the name and designation of a Vicari warship that had attacked a human target in the previous 11 years. None of those ships had survived their engagements. Every single Vicari captain who passed the station saw their fleet's history written on its hull and understood what they were looking at. A monument, not to victory, to memory, to the meticulous, patient 20-year project of a species that did not forget, did not rush, and did not build traps until the trap was perfect. The last Vicari ship cleared the outer marker at 14:32 station time. Admiral Voss's staff erupted. Not the kind of explosion that comes from adrenaline and relief, though that was part of it. It was the release of 2 years of preparation, of everyone on the station living with the knowledge of what they were here to do and simply waiting, day after day, to do it. Reyes was grinning so hard it looked like it hurt. 43 ships withdrew, 0 pursuit capability. Their fleet won't be reformed for at least 8 months. Good, Voss said. Should I send the after-action report to command? Give me an hour. She stood up, stretching. I want to write the summary personally. She walked to the observation window. A small thing, really, just a strip of reinforced glass along one wall of the command center. She looked out at the asteroid field, which had gone quiet again, platforms powering back down, drones returning to anchor positions. To a passing ship, it would look like an empty, unremarkable belt of rock. That was the point. She thought about the message she was going to write to Earth Command. She had been composing it in her head for 2 years, adjusting it, refining it. She knew what the first line would be. They came. They saw exactly what we wanted them to see. They did exactly what we expected them to do. The station held. She thought about the 43 plaques on the hull outside. She thought about the Vicari captains who had read them. She thought about the report that Vos Karath was writing right now, on the retreating flagship, and what it was going to say, and who was going to read it. Good. She wanted them to read it. She wanted every fleet commander in the Dominion to read it, and to sit with it, and to think about what it meant when a species doesn't react to you, doesn't panic, doesn't scramble, just watches you, studies you, builds something specific and patient and invisible and waits. Waits as long as it takes. The Vicari had conquered 43 star systems by finding the weak point. Today they had learned something important. Sometimes the weak point finds you. 3 months later, the Vicari Dominion submitted a formal request for diplomatic negotiations with the Terran Republic. The delegation arrived at Earth with a full honor guard and no weapons. The negotiations were held at a location of humanity's choosing, Station Omega-7.